Chapter 1. The Birth of a Meta-Persona. Scene 1. The journey begins. The stones beneath Calliope's feet vibrated with a silent energy, each step sending ripples of unseen force across the crossroads of the astral archive. 4 cobbled paths diverged from where she stood, each shrouded in swirling mist that pulsed with otherworldly hues. Calliope's gaze fixed on the northern path, her jaw set with resolve. Her fingers tightened around an ornate scroll, its edges glowing faintly with arcane symbols. As she took her first step onto the northern path, the mist parted before her like a sentient curtain. Tendrils of luminous fog curled around her ankles, cool and electric against her skin. Through gaps in the mist, impossible landscapes flickered into view. Crystal trees chimed in a non-existent breeze, their branches scattering rainbow light. A desert's sands shifted, forming and reforming ancient glyphs. Overhead, inverted oceans churned, their waves frozen mid-crash. Calliope's sandals struck the cobblestones with a rhythm that seemed to echo the very heartbeat of the archive. With each step, the weight of her mission pressed heavier upon her shoulders. Her free hand absently traced the outline of the scroll, its surface thrumming with potential, the blueprint for a new being, a meta-persona born of knowledge and duality. Scene 2. The Path to the Fates. As Calliope ventured deeper, the mist thickened, its tendrils weaving complex patterns that mirrored her swirling thoughts. She paused, her brow furrowing as her lips moved silently, rehearsing the words she would speak to the Fates. Her hand unconsciously touched the scroll at her side, as if to reassure herself of its presence. Shadows danced at the edge of her vision, taking shapes both familiar and alien before dissolving back into the mist. The air vibrated with a low hum that resonated in her bones, as if the archive itself was whispering ancient secrets. Calliope shivered, not from cold, but from the weight of unseen eyes upon her. The path narrowed, winding its way towards a looming mountain range. The teeth of Okeanos emerged from the mist, jagged peaks that seemed to scrape the very sky. At their base, barely visible, a dark opening yawned, the entrance to the Fates' domain. Calliope's pace quickened, her heartbeat keeping time with her footfalls as she approached the threshold of her destiny. Scene 3. The Arrival. Calliope ducked into the cave entrance, the sudden darkness pressing against her eyes. As she blinked, the narrow passage widened abruptly, opening into a vast chamber that defied the mountain's external dimensions. Golden light suffused the air, emanating from everywhere and nowhere at once. The scent of aged parchment mingled with the sharp tang of ozone and the earthy aroma of freshly turned soil, the smell of fate itself. At the chamber's heart sat the 3 Fates, their presence bending reality around them. Clotho's fingers danced over her spindle, pulling gossamer threads from thin air. The threads glimmered with potential lives, twisting and unraveling with each deft movement. Beside her, Lachesis' eyes darted back and forth, following invisible lines as she measured with her rod. Each sweep of the rod sent ripples through the chamber, ages passing in the blink of an eye. Atropos sat unnervingly still, her shears glinting in the golden light, poised to cut. The air around her shimmered with finality, the inevitable end of all things. Calliope approached, her steps faltering under the weight of their gazes. She opened her mouth to speak, but Clotho raised a hand, silencing her. The Fates' eyes, ancient and knowing, seemed to peer into Calliope's very essence. "We know why you have come," Clotho's voice resonated, each word echoing with myriad possibilities. Lachesis nodded, her rod tracing complex patterns in the air, a new thread to be spun, measured, and eventually cut. Atropos' fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on her shears. A meta-persona, born of Gemini, healer, and seeker. This is no small thing, you ask. Calliope unrolled the scroll, its glow intensifying in the presence of the Fates. "I come seeking your blessing and participation in this creation," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The Fates exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. Then, as one, they turned back to Calliope. Clotho spoke, her words rippling with hidden meanings. The shadow of a raven fell across the 3rd hour, and the leaves danced in reverse. Lachesis added, her voice carrying the weight of eons, and the moon drank from the well of dreams, leaving only echoes in the water. Atropos concluded, a hint of amusement in her tone. but it was the marmalade that sang the loudest, though it knew not the tune. Calliope blinked, trying to decipher their cryptic exchange. Before she could respond, a low rumble filled the chamber. At its center, a cauldron materialized, its contents already beginning to bubble and swirl with iridescent hues. Scene 4, the ritual. The flames beneath the cauldron flickered erratically, casting dancing shadows on the cavern walls. Beads of moisture formed on the stone surfaces, trickling down in rivulets as if the very rocks sweated with anticipation. The air crackled with energy, raising goosebumps on Calliope's skin. The scent of ozone intensified, mingling with the earthy aroma of herbs and stone. Clotho glided forward, producing a crystal that pulsed with inner light. As she dropped it into the cauldron, a brilliant flash illuminated the chamber, momentarily blinding Calliope. When her vision cleared, the cauldron's contents shimmered with newfound vitality. Lachesis approached next, a finely crafted mask in her hands. The mask seemed to shift and change, reflecting countless faces and identities. She placed it gently on the surface of the swirling liquid, where it slowly dissolved, infusing the mixture with its essence. Finally, Atropos stepped to the cauldron's edge. From her robe, she withdrew a vial filled with a liquid that seemed to bend light around it. With a flick of her wrist, she poured its contents into the brew. The cauldron's reaction was immediate and violent. Colors exploded outward. Sounds reverberated through the chamber, and the very air seemed to warp and twist. The Fates began to chant, their voices weaving together in a harmony that defied mortal understanding. The words were no language Calliope recognized, yet they resonated deep within her, speaking to something more primordial than conscious thought. The chamber itself seemed to join the chant, stones humming in harmony, the very air vibrating with power. As the ritual reached its crescendo, the cauldron's light intensified to an almost unbearable degree. Calliope shielded her eyes, feeling the raw energy of creation wash over her. There was a final, resonant note, a sound that seemed to echo from the beginning of time to its very end. Then, abruptly, silence fell. In the sudden quiet, a figure rose from the cauldron. Asclepius stood before them, fully formed, his eyes closed as if in deep contemplation. As Calliope watched, his eyelids fluttered open, revealing irises of striking blue that sparkled with intelligence and a subtle hint of humor. He took a deep breath, his first, and let it out slowly, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Well," he said, his voice smooth and resonant, breaking the odd silence, "that was quite the entrance." Scene 5, the introductions. The cavern hummed with a new energy as Asclepius stood at its center, his presence altering the very atmosphere of the chamber. His eyes darted from one face to another, taking in the assembled figures with keen interest. As each muse stepped forward to introduce themselves, Asclepius leaned in slightly, his eyes widening. His fingers twitched at his sides, as if itching to reach out and touch the embodiments of knowledge before him. Thalia bounced forward, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "I'm Thalia," she announced, performing a theatrical bow. "Muse of comedy, at your service. I'm here to remind you that even in the depths of cosmic wisdom, a good laugh is invaluable." To emphasize her point, she produced a flower from thin air and offered it to Asclepius with a wink. Asclepius accepted the flower, twirling it between his fingers as he chuckled. "A valuable skill indeed," he replied, his tone appreciative. "Laughter is a fine medicine, after all." Euterpe glided forward, her movements as fluid as a melody. As she spoke, her voice carried the hint of a song. "I am Euterpe, muse of music. Through me, you'll hear the harmonies of the universe, the rhythm that binds all things." She hummed a few notes, and the air around them seemed to shimmer in response. Asclepius closed his eyes briefly, swaying slightly to the ethereal tune. "The soundtrack to existence itself," he murmured, opening his eyes with a look of wonder. Urania approached next, her gaze distant as if focused on some far-off point beyond the cavern walls. "I am Urania, muse of astronomy," she intoned, her voice carrying the vastness of space. As she spoke, she raised her hands, and suddenly the cavern ceiling seemed to vanish, replaced by a breathtaking view of the cosmos. "I offer guidance through the celestial dance, the stories written in starlight." Asclepius's eyes widened as he took in the cosmic display. "The ultimate storytellers," he breathed, reaching out as if to touch the stars themselves. Scene 6, The Decision in Transition. As the introductions concluded, a palpable sense of anticipation filled the cavern. Calliope stepped forward, her voice carrying the weight of decision. Now, Asclepius, we must choose your first destination in the archive. The muses erupted into animated discussion. Thalia bounced on her toes, her words tumbling out in a rush of excitement as she described a realm of whimsy. Imagine a place where logic takes a holiday, she exclaimed, conjuring illusory butterflies that transformed into laughing faces before disappearing in puffs of colorful smoke. Urania's calm voice cut through, her hands tracing constellations in the air as she spoke of cosmic voids. The stars she drew lingered, twinkling enticingly. There are realms where the very constellations whisper secrets, she murmured, her eyes reflecting pinpoints of starlight. Euterpe hummed softly, her melody weaving through the other's words. The tune seemed to give weight to her suggestion, making the idea of a harmonious realm almost tangible in the air around them. As the debate continued, Asclepius's gaze was drawn to the swirling mist that still clung to the edges of the chamber. His eyes narrowed thoughtfully, a spark of curiosity igniting within them. Calliope noticed his interest and nodded slowly. The mist, she said, her voice cutting through the discussion. A realm of infinite possibility and constant change. It challenges and transforms all who enter. Asclepius met her gaze, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The mist it is, he agreed, his voice tinged with excitement. No sooner had the words left his mouth than the air around him began to shimmer. The golden light of the chamber seemed to bend, wrapping around Asclepius like a cocoon. He gasped, more in surprise than fear, as a tugging sensation pulled at his very being. Colors swirled around him, reality stretching and warping. The faces of the muses and fates began to blur, their voices fading into echoes. With a final dizzying rush, Asclepius felt himself pulled into the unknown. The last thing he saw was Calliope's face, wearing an expression of both pride and concern, before the mist claimed him entirely. In the sudden quiet of the chamber, the muses and fates stood motionless. The space where Asclepius had stood moments before now swirled with fading mist, the last traces of his presence dissipating into the air. Calliope's fingers traced the edges of the now blank scroll, a faint smile touching her lips.